Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the oldest stories the Greeks ever whispered. The ones that came before Zeus ruled the heavens, before Mount Olympus gleamed with marble halls, before thunder had a name or lightning had a master. This is the complete saga of the Titans, those colossal ancient beings who shaped the very bones of reality itself. It's a story that spans eons, filled with cosmic wars, divine betrayals, and the kind of family drama that makes modern soap operas look like gentle bedtime stories. We'll witness the birth of time itself, the castration of the sky, children devouring their own offspring, and battles that shook the foundations of existence. If this kind of deep mythological storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly helps you rest. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about exploring ancient chaos while the modern world sleeps around us. So settle in, let the day's worries fade away, and let's begin this epic journey through the entire story of the Titans. From the yawning void of chaos to the final echoes of their legacy in our modern world, we'll explore every twist, every betrayal, every moment of cosmic significance in this foundational myth of Western civilization. Before there was anything, before light, before darkness, before the concept of before itself, there was chaos. Not the kind of chaos you find in a teenager's bedroom or during a particularly heated political debate, but something far more profound and unsettling. This was primordial chaos, the first thing to exist according to the ancient Greeks, though calling it a thing is perhaps misleading. Chaos wasn't a swirling storm of energy or a dramatic cosmic explosion. It was emptiness itself, a vast, yawning void that stretched in directions that didn't yet exist. Imagine trying to point to nothing and saying, "There, that's where everything began." The Greeks, never ones for tidy origin stories, embraced this paradox. Their myths were like their wine, complex, intoxicating, and prone to leaving you with more questions than answers. From this primordial void, existence began to unfold. Not with a bang, but with a slow, eternal emergence, like thoughts forming in a mind that was just learning to think. First came Gaia, the earth herself. She wasn't born into the world, she was the world. Every hill that would rise, every valley that would cradle rivers, every forest that would whisper with wind. All of this emerged from her form. Gaia wasn't merely a mother figure in the way we might imagine maternal deities. She was the ultimate foundation, literally and figuratively. She was life's first solid ground, firm beneath feet that didn't yet exist to stand upon her. In the Greek imagination, she was both nurturing and terrible, capable of bringing forth life and of swallowing it whole when the mood struck her. Next came Tartarus, the deep abyss. Not hell exactly, though later myths would retrofit it as such. Tartarus was more like the basement of reality, a place so far beneath Gaia's surface that it existed in its own realm of darkness and silence. It was deeper than deep, darker than night, and it would one day serve as the ultimate prison for those who dared challenge the cosmic order. But for now, it simply was, a brooding presence beneath the emerging world. Then arrived Eros. Not the cherubic Valentine with his love arrows, but something far older and more fundamental. This Eros was the binding force of the universe, the principle of attraction that made creation possible. Without him, chaos would have remained chaotic, Gaia would have stayed barren, and the story would have ended before it began. He was the cosmic glue, the drive toward connection and creation that gave form to the formless. From chaos also emerged Nyx, the night shrouded in darkness and mystery. She was older than any god to come, a figure of such deep reverence and primal power that even mighty Zeus would one day think twice before crossing her. Alongside her came Erebus, the darkness of the underworld. not malevolent, simply unlit, the shadow that defines the light. Together, Nyx and Erebus birthed a host of shadowy offspring: Hypnos, sleep; Thanatos, death; Moros, doom; Nemesis, retribution; and others whose names sound like they were pulled from the pages of a Gothic novel. These primordial beings weren't quite deities as we understand them. They weren't the type to disguise themselves as swans and seduce mortals. They were concepts given form, forces of nature that existed before nature learned to be poetic about itself. But Gaia, ever fertile and ambitious, had grander plans than simply existing in splendid isolation. She decided it was time for company, and so, without need of a partner, as one might plant a garden alone, she gave birth to Uranus, the sky. He wasn't some bearded fellow reclining on clouds. Uranus was the entire dome of heaven, stretching over Gaia in an eternal, all-encompassing embrace. The ancients believed the sky was a physical thing, a solid firmament that could be touched if one climbed high enough. Imagine Uranus as a vast, divine lid fitted snugly over the Earth, completing the cosmic container in which all future drama would unfold. Together, Gaia and Uranus began to populate this newly formed universe, not with trees and birds, but with beings, their children, the first true generation of gods. There were 12 of them in the classic tradition, and their names ring through mythology like a roll call of cosmic forces. Oceanus, who would encircle the earth with his watery arms; Hyperion, the light-bringer and father of the sun, moon, and dawn; Cronus and Rhea, whose names are now mostly known to crossword enthusiasts and mythology scholars; Themis, the wise goddess of natural law and divine order; Mnemosyne, memory incarnate; Phoebe, shining intellect; and Rhea, destined to become the mother of gods. And then there was Cronus, the youngest of the 12, the sharpest, and arguably the most dangerous of the lot. But we'll come to his story soon enough. Gaia's fertility didn't stop with the Titans. She and Uranus also produced the Cyclopes, enormous one-eyed smiths with a flair for forging storms and thunder. These weren't the brutish monsters of later tales, but master craftsmen whose single eyes could see the essence of things with perfect clarity. They would one day forge the weapons that would reshape the cosmos. They also birthed the Hecatoncheires, beings of such absurd design that they defy easy description. Each had 50 heads and 100 arms. Imagine trying to find clothing for them or attempting to shake hands in greeting. They were living embodiments of overwhelming force, creatures whose very existence challenged the notion of what a being could be. But Uranus, despite being a cosmic entity, proved surprisingly squeamish about his more unconventional offspring. He found the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires monstrous and disturbing. In what can only be described as divine repression of the highest order, he stuffed them back into Gaia, not metaphorically but literally, forcing them back into her body as if they had never been born. One can imagine this was less than comfortable for Gaia. She groaned beneath the strain, quite literally, as her children writhed within her, desperate for freedom. The earth herself began to ache with the weight of the imprisoned, and eventually Gaia decided that enough was enough. She forged a great sickle from adamant, one of the few materials hard enough to cut divine flesh. Then, in hushed tones that rumbled through the foundations of the world, she called upon her Titan sons to rise against their father. She offered them the weapon and her blessing, asking only that one of them have the courage to act. Most of the Titans hesitated. Uranus was, after all, their father and the ruler of all that existed. To strike against him was to challenge the very order of things. But one son stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with ambition and resolve. Cronus, the youngest, the cleverest, the most willing to get his hands dirty in the service of change. Under cover of night, as Uranus descended to embrace Gaia in their eternal cosmic union, Cronus lay in wait. With a swift, merciless motion, he castrated the sky god with the adamantine sickle. Yes, this is not metaphor or euphemism. The Greeks were vivid and literal in their storytelling, never ones to shy away from the visceral realities of divine conflict. From the blood of Uranus that spilled upon Gaia sprang new forms of life, the Furies, those agents of vengeance who would one day torment the guilty, the giants, those hulking foes of future gods, and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash trees, a strangely gentle addition to this otherwise blood-soaked harvest. But perhaps most significantly, Uranus's severed member tumbled into the sea, and from the churning foam that followed emerged Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. She rose from the waves fully formed, radiant and terrible, a deity who paradoxically owed her existence to an act of violent dismemberment. Greek mythology, it seems, found no contradiction between beauty and brutality, between love and the most primal acts of rebellion. With Uranus overthrown and castrated, Cronus claimed the throne of the cosmos. The age of the Titans had begun, and with it a new chapter in the story of existence itself. But as we shall see, the cycle of violence and overthrow that began with this first act of divine rebellion was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. With Uranus defeated and the cosmic throne vacant, Cronus ascended to power and married his sister Rhea. In the divine family trees of Greek mythology, such unions were not only common, but expected. The gods kept their power concentrated within bloodlines that twisted back on themselves like ivy growing on ancient ruins. The reign of Cronus was, by most accounts, a golden age. Not literally golden, though the Greeks did speak of it as the age of gold, when the earth yielded its bounty freely, seasons were gentle, and mortals, if they existed at all, lived without suffering, war, or the burden of heavy labour. It was a time before law was needed because, so the myths claimed, no one did wrong. Picture an eternal Sunday afternoon where the weather is perfect, the food is abundant, and no one has invented taxes yet. But beneath this idyllic surface lurked a growing anxiety, not of the world, but of its ruler. Cronus, titan of time and king of all that existed, carried within him a terrible fear. As he had overthrown his father, so too might he be overthrown by his own child. This wasn't mere paranoia, it was prophecy. Uranus, in his final moments of consciousness before being cast into the depths of Tartarus, had spoken a curse disguised as a warning. As you have done to me, so shall be done to you. One of your children will rise up and cast you down, just as you have cast me down. These words echoed in Cronus's mind like a persistent nightmare, growing louder with each passing eon. And so Cronus devised what can only be described as the most disturbing parenting technique in mythological history. He decided to eat his children. Each time Rhea bore him a child, Cronus would take the newborn and swallow it whole. Not chewing, not killing, just one enormous divine gulp, like swallowing an oyster, only the oyster was his own offspring. First came Hestia, who would one day become the goddess of hearth and home. Down she went into Cronus's gullet. Then Demeter, the future grain goddess, destined to teach mortals agriculture and the mysteries of the harvest. She too disappeared into her father's maw. Next was Hera, who would become queen of the gods, followed by Hades, future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, destined to rule the seas. One by one, each child was swallowed and tucked away inside Cronus's divine digestive system. It's unclear what accommodations existed within his belly, but rest assured, the children remained alive, growing and waiting in the darkness of their father's stomach. Imagine the conversations they might have had, the games they played, the plans they made while imprisoned in that most intimate of prisons. Rhea, understandably, grew weary of this arrangement. One can forgive her initial hesitation to complain. Cronus had, after all, just overthrown a tyrannical father with a very sharp sickle. But after watching 5 of her children disappear into her husband's throat, even the most patient Titaness would begin to draw the line. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, Rhea sought help from the one being who had always been there, who had always known what to do, her mother, Gaia. The Earth Mother, as always, had a plan. When the time came for the child to be born, Rhea travelled in secret to the island of Crete, a land that in Greek mythology always seemed to be the go-to destination for divine child hiding. There, in a cave atop Mount Ida, she gave birth to her final son, Zeus. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, creating a convincingly baby-shaped bundle. When she presented this to her husband, Cronus, ever the efficient cannibal, swallowed it whole without question. Whether this says more about his parenting skills or his attention to detail is unclear, but the deception worked perfectly. Thus, Zeus was hidden away, raised in secret in the Cretan cave. Some stories say he was nursed by nymphs, others by a goat named Amalthea, whose milk nourished him, and whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. The details vary depending on which poet you ask, but the essentials remain. The future king of the gods was raised on wild honey, mountain air, and presumably a growing sense of destiny. To keep his cries hidden from Cronus, a band of warriors known as the Curetes danced around the cave, clashing their shields and spears in a rhythmic cacophony that drowned out any infant wails. It's perhaps the only instance in history of interpretive dance being used as a military defense system, and apparently it worked beautifully. Meanwhile, back in the divine palace, Cronus carried on his rule, utterly unaware that his downfall was literally growing up in a cave on Crete. The stone he had swallowed sat in his stomach alongside his 5 other children, and if stones could be smug, this one certainly would have been. But time, and Cronus was, after all, the embodiment of time itself, has a way of revealing all secrets. Zeus grew tall and strong, and unlike his Titan relatives, he possessed something that would prove crucial in the battles to come: a flair for strategy, an understanding that raw power alone was not enough to reshape the world. When Zeus reached maturity, he knew the time had come to challenge his father. But he wouldn't do it through brute force alone. He would use cunning, the same quality that had allowed Cronus to defeat Uranus. The student, it seemed, had learned well from the master's example. Zeus enlisted the help of Metis, a goddess of wisdom and cunning counsel, who provided him with an emetic potion. The plan was elegantly simple: trick Cronus into drinking the potion, force him to vomit up his children, and then unite them in rebellion against their father. The execution was flawless. Cronus, perhaps feeling unwell after eons of carrying 5 gods and a stone in his stomach, readily accepted what he thought was a healing draught. The results were immediate and dramatic. First came the stone, still wrapped in its baby blanket, a rather embarrassing reminder of how easily he had been deceived. Then, in reverse order of their consumption, came his children: Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia. Each emerged fully grown and, understandably, rather displeased about their extended stay in their father's digestive tract. They had spent their formative years in darkness, but they had not been idle. They had planned, they had prepared, and now they were ready for war. The 6 children of Cronus, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, stood united for the first time in their existence. They looked upon their father not with filial affection, but with the cold determination of revolutionaries. The golden age of Cronus was about to end, and it would not go quietly into history. But before we witness the great war that would reshape the cosmos, we must pause to consider what this chapter of myth tells us about the nature of power, family, and the inevitable march of time. Cronus, in trying to prevent his own downfall, had created the very conditions that would ensure it. By swallowing his children, he had united them in suffering and given them a shared cause for rebellion. His fear of the future had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The myth of Cronus devouring his children appears in cultures across the world, from Mesopotamian tales of gods consuming their offspring to Hindu stories of cosmic cycles of destruction and renewal. It speaks to universal fears about generational conflict, the anxiety that each new generation represents both hope and threat to the old order. In Cronus, we also see time personified, not as a gentle river flowing toward the sea, but as a devouring force that consumes everything it creates. His very name would later become conflated with Cronus, the personification of time itself, though they were likely originally separate figures. Time devours all things, the myth suggests, but it also preserves them, carrying them forward into new ages. The stone that Cronus swallowed would later be placed by Zeus at Delphi, the sacred centre of the world, as a monument to divine deception and the power of cleverness over brute force. Pilgrims would journey from across the Greek world to see this omphalos, this navel of the earth, a literal rock wrapped in myth that represented the moment when the old order began to crumble. And so ends the reign of Cronus, not with the dignity of a king stepping down, but with the humiliation of a father who had become his own worst enemy. The golden age was over, and the age of war was about to begin. The cosmos itself would tremble as father faced son, as the old gods met the new, and as the very foundations of reality were tested in the crucible of divine conflict. War had never come to the cosmos before. Until this moment, divine disputes had been settled through single acts of violence, Cronus overthrowing Uranus with one swift stroke of the sickle, more surgery than battle. But when Zeus freed his siblings from their father's stomach, something unprecedented occurred. For the first time in the history of existence, two complete generations of gods stood in opposition. This would not be a family disagreement over forgotten sacrifices or disputed territories. This was war with a capital W, the kind that poets would sing about for millennia, their voices hoarse with the magnitude of the tale they were trying to tell. On one side stood the Titans, ancient and elemental, vast beyond mortal comprehension. They embodied the raw forces of the world itself, Oceanus, the endless waters that encircled the earth, Hyperion, the brilliant light of the sun, Themis, the unchanging law of natural order, Mnemosyne, the deep well of memory. These were beings who had existed since the dawn of time, accustomed to being worshipped or at least left undisturbed in their cosmic duties. On the other side were the Olympians, younger, hungrier, and armed with a sense of destiny so potent it could have curdled milk at 50 paces. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades led the charge, supported by their sisters Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, along with a growing coalition of divine allies who sensed which way the cosmic winds were blowing. The war is known as the Titanomachy, a word that should be pronounced with a stiff drink in hand and a healthy respect for the forces it describes. It means Battle of the Titans, though that hardly captures the scale of what was about to unfold. This wasn't merely a succession dispute, it was a fundamental rupture in the fabric of creation itself. The battleground was primarily Thessaly, that wild region of northern Greece where mountains scraped the sky and valleys plunged toward the underworld. But given the scope of the conflict, one imagines the fighting spilled well beyond any map. When gods go to war, geography becomes negotiable. For 10 long years, the war raged without resolution. Neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Titans fought from Mount Olympus, a gloomy peak that suited their ancient gravitas. The Olympians established themselves on Mount Olympus, smaller at the time, but destined to become the most famous address in the divine realm. It was a stalemate of cosmic proportions. Lightning clashed against primordial stone. Earthquakes answered the roar of the sea, and the very heavens rang with the clash of immortal arms. Mountains were hurled like pebbles. Rivers were torn from their beds, and the sky itself cracked under the strain of divine fury. But the Titans, for all their immense power, had a crucial weakness. They lacked innovation. Their strength was ancient but static, rooted in the unchanging patterns of the natural world. The Olympians, however, were learning, adapting, evolving with each battle. They represented not just youth but change itself, the principle that the universe need not remain forever as it had always been. It was Gaia who provided the key to victory, though her motivations remain mysterious. Perhaps she favoured her grandson Zeus over her son Cronus. Perhaps she simply enjoyed stirring the pot of cosmic drama. Or perhaps she understood that the universe needed new management, fresh blood to guide it into whatever came next. Gaia revealed to Zeus a crucial secret. The war could only be won by enlisting those who had been betrayed and imprisoned by the previous regime. Deep in the bowels of Tartarus, forgotten and abandoned, languished the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the very beings that Uranus had found too monstrous to tolerate and Cronus had been content to leave buried. Zeus, never one to let pride interfere with practicality, descended into the abyss. He fought his way past guardian monsters and shattered the adamantine chains that bound the prisoners. The Cyclopes, those master smiths with their single, all-seeing eyes, were overwhelmed with gratitude. In return for their freedom, they forged weapons that would become legendary. For Zeus, the thunderbolt that could split mountains and illuminate the darkest corners of the world. For Poseidon, the trident that could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, the helm of darkness that rendered its wearer invisible and, according to legend, quite smug about it. The Hecatonchires, those 100-handed giants, brought something even more valuable than weapons: overwhelming force. Imagine creatures that could hurl boulders and entire trees like a mortal might throw pebbles, and you begin to understand why their addition to Zeus's army changed everything. The final battle was a spectacle that defied description. The air grew thick with divine energy as lightning bolts arced across the sky like angry comets. Massive rocks soared through the heavens like celestial bowling balls launched from cosmic catapults. Trees were uprooted and flung with casual violence. Mountains were gouged and scarred, and in the centre of it all stood Zeus, no longer the hidden infant of Crete, but a storm god incarnate, wielding thunder as if it were his birthright. The Hecatonchires proved decisive, their 100 arms working in perfect coordination to create a barrage of projectiles that no defence could withstand. The very earth groaned under the assault, and slowly, inevitably, the Titans began to fall. Cronus, to his credit, fought with the desperate fury of a king who knew his time was ending. He wielded the same adamantine sickle that had unmade Uranus, but age and fear had dulled his edge. This was no longer his world, and deep down, he knew it. In the climactic moment, Zeus unleashed the full fury of his thunderbolts. The sky split open like a cracked egg. Flames poured from the wounded earth, and the very foundations of reality shuddered. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, the Titans lay defeated. The male Titans were cast down into Tartarus, imprisoned behind gates of adamant and guarded by the very Hecatonchires they had once helped to imprison. It was poetic justice of the most literal kind. Their former victims had become their eternal jailers. Cronus himself was bound in chains forged by the Cyclopes and vanished into the deepest parts of Tartarus. Later traditions would soften his fate, relocating him to the Isles of the Blessed, where he ruled peacefully over the spirits of the heroic dead, a kind of divine retirement plan. But in the immediate aftermath of his defeat, he simply disappeared from the active mythology, another fallen king added to the cosmic graveyard. The female Titans were largely spared Zeus's wrath. Rhea, after all, was his mother, and Themis, Mnemosyne, and the others represented concepts too fundamental to destroy. Law, memory, and fate were not things even Zeus dared to eliminate entirely. They were absorbed into the new order, their wisdom preserved even as their political power was transferred to the victorious Olympians. One Titan, however, received special attention. Atlas, who had served as the general of Cronus's armies, was singled out for a punishment that would become legendary. Zeus condemned him to hold up the heavens themselves, not the earth, as popular culture often depicts, but the sky, the great dome of stars and clouds that arched over the world. Forever, no rest, no relief, no end to his cosmic burden. He became a solitary figure at the edge of the world, muscles straining against the weight of infinity, the original bearer of an impossible load. With the Titans defeated, Zeus and his brothers divided the cosmos among themselves in what must have been the most consequential game of chance in history. Zeus claimed the sky and the upper air, establishing himself as king of the gods. Poseidon took dominion over the seas, all the waters that flowed and crashed and whispered across the world. Hades, drawing what many would consider the short straw, became lord of the underworld, not hell as later traditions would imagine it, but the shadowy realm where the dead dwelt in quiet contemplation of their former lives. The earth itself remained neutral territory, shared among all the gods, a realm where mortals would eventually build their cities and tell their stories, never quite sure which deity might be watching from the shadows. And so, the age of the Olympians began. Mount Olympus was transformed from a simple peak into a palace of clouds and gold, a place of ambrosia, feasts and divine politics that would make the most Byzantine court seem straightforward by comparison. The gods took up residence in their celestial halls, and the business of ruling the universe began in earnest. But victory, as the Greeks well knew, always comes with a price. The Titanomachy had established the Olympians as the supreme powers of the cosmos, but it had also set a precedent. Gods could be overthrown, even the mightiest could fall, and somewhere in the back of Zeus's mind, a small voice whispered the same warning that had once haunted Cronus, that one day he too might face a child with revolution in their heart. The war was over, but the cycle of divine succession was far from broken. If anything, it had simply entered a new phase, one where the stakes were higher and the consequences more far-reaching than ever before. With the dust of war settled and the Titans safely imprisoned in Tartarus, Zeus found himself in the position that every revolutionary eventually faces, the transition from rebel to ruler. It's one thing to overthrow a tyrant, it's quite another to govern a cosmos without becoming the very thing you fought against. Zeus established his court on Mount Olympus, transforming what had been a military headquarters into the most magnificent palace the universe had ever seen. Golden halls stretched beyond the horizon, filled with the sound of divine laughter and the clinking of ambrosia cups. But beneath the celebration, Zeus carried a burden that would define his entire reign, the weight of prophecy. You see, the same oracles that had warned Cronus of his downfall now whispered similar warnings to Zeus. Gaia and Uranus, those ancient voices of cosmic wisdom, had spoken a new prophecy. Zeus, like his father and grandfather before him, would one day be overthrown by his own child. The cycle of divine succession would continue, and the king of the gods would eventually face the same fate he had inflicted upon Cronus. This prophecy haunted Zeus in ways that his thunderbolts could never strike down. He had witnessed firsthand what happened when a god tried to prevent his prophesied downfall. Cronos's attempt to devour his children had only ensured their eventual rebellion, yet Zeus could not simply ignore the warning. He was, after all, a god of many appetites, and his romantic entanglements were already becoming the stuff of legend. The crisis came to a head with Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning counsel who had helped Zeus defeat his father. Metis was not merely beautiful, she was brilliant, her mind sharp enough to cut through the most complex problems of divine governance. When she became pregnant with Zeus's child, the prophecy suddenly became terrifyingly specific. The child she carried would one day surpass Zeus in power, and if she bore a second child, that son would be mighty enough to overthrow even the storm god himself. Zeus, faced with this cosmic dilemma, chose a solution that was both pragmatic and horrifying. Following in his father's footsteps, but with a twist of his own devising, he decided to swallow Metis whole. But unlike Cronus, who had simply gulped down his children without thought, Zeus was more strategic. He tricked Metis with flattery and sweet words, convincing her to transform into a drop of water, which he then consumed. This act of divine cannibalism was not without consequences. Metis didn't die, she couldn't, being immortal, but she became part of Zeus, whispering wisdom and counsel from within his very being. The child continued to grow, not in a womb, but inside the king of the gods himself. Eventually, Zeus began to suffer from headaches of cosmic proportions. These weren't ordinary migraines brought on by the stress of ruling the universe, though that would have been understandable enough. These were blinding, splitting pains, as if an idea were trying to claw its way out of his skull, which, in a very literal sense, it was. Desperate for relief, Zeus called upon Hephaestus, the divine smith, to take drastic action. With a bronze axe, Hephaestus split open Zeus's head like a ripe fruit. From the wound sprang Athena, fully grown, clad in armor, brandishing a spear and letting loose a triumphant battle cry that reportedly echoed across heaven and earth. It was, to put it mildly, the most dramatic birth in mythological history. Athena emerged not as a helpless infant, but as a complete goddess, born of Zeus's mind and Metis's wisdom, combining the power of the king of the gods with the intelligence of the wisest Titaness. She was, in many ways, the perfect child, loyal to her father, brilliant in counsel, and completely uninterested in patricide. The prophecy had been fulfilled in the most unexpected way possible. Zeus had indeed been surpassed by his child, but Athena's superiority lay not in raw power, but in wisdom. She became one of the most revered deities in the Greek pantheon, goddess of strategic warfare, crafts, and the kind of intelligence that builds civilizations rather than destroying them. But the fear of usurpation never entirely left Zeus. Throughout his reign, he would remain vigilant for signs of potential rebellion, quick to punish those who showed too much ambition, and careful to maintain the delicate balance of power that kept the Olympian order stable. Meanwhile, his brothers were establishing their own domains. Poseidon ruled the seas with a mixture of majesty and petulance, creating storms when angered and calm waters when pleased. His palace beneath the waves was said to rival Olympus itself, filled with coral halls and chambers where sea nymphs danced to the rhythm of the tides. Hades withdrew to his shadowy kingdom, becoming perhaps the most dutiful of the three brothers. Despite later traditions that would cast him as a villain, Hades was actually a just and orderly ruler. His realm was governed by strict laws, and while it was certainly gloomy, it was also peaceful. The dead were sorted according to their deeds in life, with the virtuous sent to the Elysian fields and the wicked punished in Tartarus alongside the imprisoned Titans. The sisters too found their places in the new order. Hera became Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, though their marriage would prove to be one of the most tumultuous relationships in all of mythology. Demeter took charge of agriculture and the fertility of the earth, ensuring that mortals would have grain to harvest and bread to eat. Hestia, the eldest, became goddess of the hearth, the sacred fire that burned at the center of every home and city. But even as the Olympians settled into their roles, the cosmos was not yet stable. The defeat of the Titans had created a power vacuum that other forces were eager to fill. And Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, was growing increasingly displeased with how her grandson was managing the universe. The imprisonment of her Titan children in Tartarus had been a bitter pill to swallow, and Zeus's increasingly authoritarian rule reminded her uncomfortably of the tyrants she had helped to overthrow. In her ancient wisdom, Gaia began to contemplate whether it might be time for another change in management. And so, in the depths of the earth, she began to stir once more, preparing to birth a new challenger to the Olympian order. This would not be another generation of gods, but something far more primal and terrifying, a monster so vast and powerful that even Zeus would tremble at its approach. Deep in the volcanic heart of the earth, where molten rock bubbled and hissed with primordial fury, Gaia conceived her most terrible child. She mated with Tartarus itself, not with a being dwelling in the abyss, but with the abyss itself, that yawning chasm of darkness and despair. From this union of earth and void came Typhon, a creature so monstrous that the very act of describing him strains the limits of language. Typhon was not merely large, he was colossal beyond comprehension. The poet Hesiod tells us that his head brushed the stars, his arms stretched from east to west, and his eyes blazed with fire that could melt mountains. From the waist down, he was a writhing mass of serpents, each one venomous enough to kill a god, all of them hissing and snapping like a particularly hostile garden that had achieved consciousness and decided it didn't like visitors. But perhaps most terrifying of all were his voices. Typhon had not one mouth, but many, and each spoke in different tongues. Sometimes human speech, sometimes the bellow of bulls, sometimes the roar of lions, and at times the cacophony would erupt into sounds that had no earthly equivalent. The voice of thunder, the scream of hurricanes, the grinding roar of earthquakes. He was, in essence, every natural disaster given form and fury. When Typhon rose from the earth and began his march toward Olympus, the very ground cracked beneath his feet. Mountains crumbled at his approach, rivers boiled away, and the sky itself seemed to recoil from his presence. This was not a war in the traditional sense. This was chaos incarnate, challenging the established order of the universe. The Olympians, for all their power and recent victory over the Titans, had never faced anything like Typhon. Most of them, in fact, took one look at the approaching monster and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. They transformed themselves into animals and fled to Egypt, where their disguises would later inspire local myths about animal-headed deities. It was, one might say, the most dignified retreat in divine history, though dignified might be stretching the definition somewhat. Zeus, however, did not flee, whether from courage, pride, or simply the understanding that someone had to make a stand. The king of the gods prepared to face Typhon alone. He armed himself with his thunderbolts, called upon all his power over storm and sky, and met the monster in single combat. The battle that followed was unlike anything the cosmos had ever witnessed. Lightning clashed against primordial fire, the very air split with the force of their conflict, and mountains were torn from their roots and hurled like stones. The earth groaned beneath them, the seas boiled, and the sky cracked like a broken mirror. But in the first round of their cosmic duel, the unthinkable happened. Typhon won. The monster managed to grapple with Zeus, overpowering even the king of the gods through sheer, overwhelming force. In a scene that must have been both terrifying and absurd, Typhon tore the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, the divine equivalent of cutting someone's puppet strings, leaving the storm god helpless and paralyzed. Typhon then dragged the defeated Zeus to a cave in Cilicia, where he was guarded by the she-dragon Delphine. There Zeus lay, powerless and humiliated, while Typhon prepared to remake the universe according to his own chaotic vision. It seemed that the age of the Olympians was about to end before it had truly begun. But Zeus had allies, even in his darkest hour. Hermes, the messenger god and master thief, along with Pan, the goat-footed god of the wild, staged a daring rescue mission. They snuck into Typhon's cave, retrieved Zeus's stolen sinews, and restored them to the fallen king. It was perhaps the most important heist in mythological history, and it changed the course of the war. Restored to his full power and burning with divine fury, Zeus returned to battle Typhon with renewed determination. This time, he held nothing back. He unleashed the full arsenal of heaven, thunderbolt after thunderbolt, each one more devastating than the last, until the very air caught fire and the earth beneath them began to melt. The final confrontation took place on Mount Etna in Sicily, where Zeus at last gained the upper hand. With a barrage of lightning that lit up the entire Mediterranean, he struck Typhon down, burying the monster beneath the volcanic mountain. There Typhon remains to this day, his writhing causing the earthquakes that shake the region, his breath emerging as lava and volcanic gas. Every eruption of Mount Etna is said to be Typhon stirring in his prison, a reminder that chaos can never be completely destroyed, only contained. The monster sleeps fitfully beneath the mountain, dreaming perhaps of the day when he might break free and challenge the gods once more. With Typhon's defeat, the last great threat to Zeus's rule was eliminated. Gaia, seeing that even her most terrible child could not overthrow the Olympians, finally accepted the new order. The age of cosmic upheaval was over, and the reign of Zeus was secure at last. But the victory came at a cost. The battle with Typhon had shown Zeus the true extent of the forces arrayed against him, and it had demonstrated that even the king of the gods was not invincible. From that day forward, Zeus would rule with a mixture of wisdom and paranoia, always watching for signs of rebellion, always ready to strike down any who might threaten the stability of his reign. The cosmos had found its equilibrium, but it was a balance maintained through strength and vigilance, not through the natural harmony that had characterized earlier ages. The Olympians were supreme, but their supremacy was built on the bones of their enemies and the constant threat of divine retribution. While the great Titans languished in the depths of Tartarus, their children walked free in the world above, carrying within their veins the blood of the old order and the memories of a time before Zeus's rule. These second-generation Titans, caught between the ancient world of their parents and the new reality of Olympian dominance, would play crucial roles in shaping the mythology and religion of the Greeks. Among the most significant of these was Prometheus, whose very name means forethought. He was the son of the Titan Iapetus and the Oceanid Clymene, and unlike many of his relatives, he possessed the wisdom to see which way the cosmic winds were blowing. During the Titanomachy, Prometheus had sided with Zeus, recognizing that the young Olympians represented the future, while his Titan kin clung to a past that could not be restored. This decision earned him a place in the new order, but Prometheus was not content to simply serve as a minor functionary in Zeus's administration. He had grander ambitions, and they centered on a species that was just beginning to emerge from the primordial mud, humanity. The creation of mortals is told differently in various sources, but in many versions it was Prometheus himself who shaped the first humans from clay, breathing life into them with the help of Athena. Whether creator or simply benefactor, Prometheus looked upon these fragile, short-lived creatures and saw potential that the other gods missed. Zeus, however, had different plans for humanity. To him, mortals were amusing pets at best, useful servants at worst. He was determined to keep them dependent, ignorant, and above all, obedient to divine will. Chief among the gifts he withheld from them was fire, that crackling essence of civilization that meant the difference between raw meat and cooked food, between cold caves and warm homes, between darkness and light. Fire was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of knowledge, progress, and independence. With fire, humans could forge metal, cook food, and extend their activities into the night. They could begin to build the foundations of civilization itself. And that, Zeus feared, might lead them to question the natural order that placed gods above mortals. So when Prometheus stole fire from the sacred hearth of Olympus and carried it down to humanity in a hollow fennel stalk, he was committing more than theft. He was staging a revolution. With that single act, he transformed humanity from helpless creatures cowering in caves to beings capable of progress, innovation, and ultimately, civilization. Zeus's reaction was swift and merciless. The king of the gods devised a punishment that would become legendary for its cruelty and its permanence. Prometheus was chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where each day an eagle, sacred to Zeus, would descend and tear out his liver. Each night the liver would regenerate, and the torment would begin anew with the dawn. This was not merely physical torture, but psychological warfare of the highest order. The liver, in ancient Greek thought, was the seat of emotion and passion, not the heart as we might think today. So this wasn't just the destruction of an organ, it was the daily unravelling of Prometheus's very essence, renewed each night only to be destroyed again. But Prometheus's punishment was not the end of Zeus's revenge. The king of the gods also devised a punishment for humanity itself, one that would be both gift and curse, blessing and bane. He commissioned the creation of woman. Enter Pandora, whose name means all-gifted. She was crafted by Hephaestus from clay and water, then blessed by all the gods with various attributes: beauty from Aphrodite, musical skill from Apollo, persuasion from Hermes, and curiosity, that most dangerous of gifts, from the gods collectively. She was, in essence, a divine work of art designed to be irresistible and ultimately destructive. Pandora was sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name means afterthought, and who lived up to his name by accepting the gift despite his brother's warnings never to accept anything from Zeus. Along with Pandora came a sealed jar, not a box, despite centuries of mistranslation, filled with all the evils that would plague humanity. Disease, old age, war, famine, and countless other miseries. The story of what happened next is well known. Driven by the curiosity that the gods had instilled in her, Pandora opened the jar, releasing all the evils into the world. By the time she managed to close it again, only one thing remained inside: hope. Whether hope was trapped as a comfort for humanity or as the cruelest torment of all, the illusion that things might get better remains a matter of interpretation. Thus, humanity received both the gift of fire and the burden of suffering, the tools of civilization and the certainty of mortality. It was a complex legacy, one that reflected the ambiguous relationship between gods and mortals in Greek thought. But the story of Prometheus doesn't end with his eternal punishment. Centuries later, during one of his 12 labours, Heracles would pass through the Caucasus and, moved by pity for the suffering Titan, would slay the eagle and break the chains that bound him. Zeus, by then perhaps mellowed by time or impressed by his son's compassion, allowed the rescue to stand. Prometheus's liberation was more than just the freeing of a prisoner. It was a symbol of the eventual triumph of compassion over vengeance, of mercy over justice. The Titan who had given fire to humanity was himself freed by a hero who embodied the best qualities that fire had made possible: courage, strength, and the willingness to help those in need. Other children of the Titans played their own roles in the unfolding drama of Greek mythology. Atlas, the son of Iapetus and brother of Prometheus, had chosen the wrong side in the Titanomachy and now bore the weight of the heavens on his shoulders. His daughters, the Pleiades, became stars in the night sky, while his other daughters, the Hesperides, guarded the golden apples at the edge of the world. Leto, daughter of the Titans Coeus and Phoebe, would become the mother of Apollo and Artemis after a pregnancy made difficult by Hera's jealousy. Asteria, Leto's sister, transformed herself into a quail to escape Zeus's advances, then became the island of Delos, where her sister would finally give birth to the twin gods. Hecate, another child of Titans, occupied a unique position in the new order. She was honored by Zeus above all other deities, granted power over earth, sea, and sky. She became the goddess of magic, crossroads, and liminal spaces, those threshold places where one world meets another. In many ways, she embodied the position of all the Titan-born, caught between the old world and the new, wielding ancient power in a modern context. These second-generation Titans served as bridges between the primordial past and the Olympian present. They carried forward the wisdom and power of their parents while adapting to the realities of Zeus's rule. Some, like Prometheus, challenged the new order and paid the price. Others, like Hecate, found ways to thrive within it. All of them served as reminders that the defeat of the Titans had not erased their influence. It had simply transformed it. Their stories would inspire countless later tales of rebellion and redemption, of the price of knowledge and the value of compassion. In Prometheus, the Greeks found a symbol of the noble rebel, the one who suffers for the sake of others. In Pandora, they saw both the beauty and danger of curiosity, the double-edged nature of progress itself. These myths reflected the Greeks' own complex relationship with change and tradition, with the benefits and costs of civilization, with the eternal tension between divine authority and human aspiration. The children of the Titans embodied these contradictions, serving as both warnings and inspirations for mortals who sought to understand their place in a cosmos ruled by gods but shaped by their own choices. As the Olympian order solidified and the immediate aftermath of the Titanomachy faded into legend, a new chapter began in the story of the cosmos. This was the age of heroes, that liminal time when God still walked among mortals, when the children of divine unions strode across the earth performing impossible deeds, and when the blood of titans still flowed in the veins of those who would reshape the world through courage, cunning, and often spectacular hubris. The heroes of Greek mythology were not mere mortals who happened to be brave. They were liminal beings caught between the human and divine realms, carrying within themselves the power of their godly parents and the mortality of their human ones. Many of them could trace their lineage back to the Titans themselves, inheriting not just divine strength, but also the rebellious spirit that had once challenged the very foundations of the cosmos. Consider Heracles, perhaps the most famous of all Greek heroes. Born of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene, he carried within his veins the power of the king of the gods. But his story was also intimately connected to the Titan legacy through his famous 12 labors, many of which involved confronting creatures that were themselves children or descendants of the ancient Titans. The Nemean lion, whose golden hide could not be pierced by mortal weapons, was the offspring of Echidna and Typhon, that monstrous pair whose lineage traced back to the primordial forces that had challenged Zeus himself. The Lernaean Hydra, with its regenerating heads and poisonous breath, was another child of the same terrible union. The three-headed hound Cerberus, guardian of the underworld, shared the same monstrous parentage. In facing these creatures, Heracles was not simply performing heroic deeds, he was cleaning up the remnants of the Titanic age, one monster at a time. Each labor was, in essence, a small echo of the Titanomachy, a confrontation between the ordered world of the Olympians and the chaotic forces that had preceded it. But Heracles was also connected to the Titans through his role as the liberator of Prometheus. During his quest for the golden apples of the Hesperides, Heracles encountered the suffering Titan chained to his rock in the Caucasus. Moved by compassion, or perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit in rebellion, Heracles slew the eagle that tormented Prometheus and broke the chains that bound him. This act was more than heroic mercy. It was a symbolic reconciliation between the old order and the new. Prometheus, the Titan who had championed humanity, was freed by a hero who embodied the best of what humanity could become when touched by divine power. The Firebringer was liberated by one who carried that fire forward into a new age. Perseus, another great hero, faced the Gorgon Medusa, whose origins traced back to the primordial sea deities and whose sisters were immortal remnants of an earlier age. When he severed her head, the blood that spilled gave birth to Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry heroes between earth and sky, and Chrysaor, a warrior born fully armed from divine ichor. Even in death, the old powers gave birth to new wonders. Theseus, the hero king of Athens, descended into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur, that hybrid creature born from divine punishment and unnatural desire. The labyrinth itself was a creation of Daedalus, whose name means cunning worker, and whose inventive genius echoed the creative power of the Titans themselves. In navigating the maze and slaying the beast, Theseus was confronting not just a monster, but the twisted legacy of divine justice and mortal folly. Jason and the Argonauts sailed to the edge of the known world in search of the Golden Fleece, passing through waters that were the domain of Oceanus, the Titan who encircled the earth with his flowing arms. Their ship, the Argo, was built with timber from the sacred grove of Dodona, where Zeus's oracle spoke through the rustling of leaves, a reminder that even the new gods relied on the ancient wisdom of the earth itself. These heroes shared certain characteristics that set them apart from ordinary mortals. They possessed strength that bordered on the superhuman, courage that verged on madness, and a tendency toward hubris that often led to their downfall. But perhaps most importantly, they served as bridges between the age of gods and the age of men, carrying forward the power and wisdom of the divine realm while remaining fundamentally mortal and therefore relatable to human audiences. The heroic age was also marked by the presence of wise centaurs like Chiron, who was himself the son of the Titan Cronus. Unlike his wild and lustful brethren, Chiron was noble, learned, and skilled in the arts of healing and prophecy. He served as mentor to many of the greatest heroes, including Achilles, Jason, and Asclepius, the god of medicine. In Chiron, the wisdom of the Titans was passed down to a new generation, tempered by experience and refined by suffering. But the centaur's story was also one of sacrifice and transformation. Accidentally wounded by one of Heracles' arrows dipped in the Hydra's poison, Chiron suffered eternal agony that even his healing arts could not cure. Eventually, he chose to give up his immortality to free Prometheus from his chains, trading his divine nature for the liberation of the Firebringer. It was an act that embodied the noblest aspects of both titanic wisdom and heroic sacrifice. The heroes of this age were not perfect beings. They were flawed, passionate, and often destructive in their pursuit of glory. Achilles' rage nearly cost the Greeks the Trojan War. Odysseus' cleverness led him into a decade of wandering and suffering. Heracles' strength was matched by his capacity for violence and madness, but in their very imperfection, they reflected the complex legacy of their divine ancestry. They carried within themselves the creative and destructive potential of the Titans, the ordered authority of the Olympians, and the mortal understanding of limitation and loss. They were, in essence, the universe's attempt to reconcile its contradictory impulses, the desire for change and the need for stability, the drive toward transcendence and the acceptance of mortality. The heroic age also saw the rise of great cities and civilizations, many of which claimed descent from divine founders. Thebes was built by Cadmus, who sowed dragon's teeth that sprouted into armed warriors. Athens was founded under the protection of Athena, the goddess born from Zeus's head and Metis's wisdom. Troy was built by Poseidon and Apollo, working as common labourers under the command of King Laomedon. These cities became centers of culture and learning, places where the stories of gods and heroes were preserved in epic poetry, tragic drama, and religious ritual. The myths that had once been living realities became artistic expressions, philosophical allegories, and moral teachings. The raw power of the Titans was transformed into the refined culture of classical civilization. But even as the heroic age flourished, the seeds of its own decline were already planted. The heroes were, by definition, exceptional beings, and their very exceptionalism set them apart from ordinary humanity. As the generations passed, and the direct influence of the gods waned, mortals found themselves increasingly distant from the divine realm that had once been so accessible. The age of heroes gradually gave way to the age of men, a time when mortals would have to rely on their own strength and wisdom rather than divine intervention. The stories of the Titans and their descendants became legends, then myths, then literature. But their influence never entirely disappeared. It simply transformed, taking new shapes in each generation that encountered these ancient tales. In the heroes, we see the final flowering of the Titanic legacy. They embodied the best and worst of their divine heritage, carrying forward the power and wisdom of the old gods while remaining fundamentally human in their struggles and aspirations. They served as a bridge between the cosmic dramas of the divine realm and the more intimate stories of human experience, showing how the great themes of creation, rebellion, and transformation played out on a scale that mortals could understand and relate to. Their stories would inspire countless generations of poets, artists, and philosophers, each finding new meanings in these ancient tales of gods and monsters, heroes and villains, triumph and tragedy. The blood of Titans flowed in their veins, but it was their humanity that made their stories immortal. As the centuries passed, and Greek civilization matured from its heroic infancy into the sophisticated culture of the classical age, the stories of the Titans underwent a profound transformation. What had once been literal accounts of cosmic battles and divine genealogies began to be interpreted as allegories, symbols, and philosophical concepts. The raw mythological material was refined by thinkers and poets into something more abstract but no less powerful, a symbolic language for understanding the fundamental forces that shape existence itself. This transformation began with the pre-Socratic philosophers, those bold thinkers who first dared to seek natural rather than supernatural explanations for the phenomena they observed in the world around them. Yet even as they moved away from literal belief in the old myths, they found in the Titans a rich source of metaphorical insight into the nature of reality. Heraclitus of Ephesus, who lived in the 6th century before the Common Era, saw in the cosmic struggles of the Titans a reflection of his own philosophy of eternal flux and change. The overthrow of Uranus by Cronus and Cronus by Zeus represented to him the fundamental principle that all things are in constant motion, that stability is an illusion, and that conflict is the father and king of all things. The Titanomachy was not just a war between gods, it was the eternal struggle between opposing forces that drives all change and development in the universe. Empedocles, another pre-Socratic thinker, identified the Titans with his 4 fundamental elements: earth, air, fire, and water. In his cosmology, these elements were engaged in an eternal cycle of combination and separation driven by the opposing forces of love and strife. The Titans, in this interpretation, became the basic building blocks of reality itself, their conflicts and alliances determining the shape and structure of the physical world. But it was Plato who most thoroughly transformed the Titans from mythological beings into philosophical concepts. In his dialogue Timaeus, he reinterpreted the creation myths as allegories for the formation of the cosmos according to mathematical and geometric principles. The Titans became symbols of the raw material of existence, the chaotic, unformed potential that must be shaped by divine reason into an ordered and harmonious whole. Plato's student Aristotle took this process even further, treating the myths as primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena. In his view, the stories of the Titans represented early humanity's efforts to explain earthquakes, storms, and other natural disasters by attributing them to the actions of anthropomorphic deities. While he respected the poetic power of these stories, he saw them as ultimately superseded by more rigorous philosophical and scientific inquiry. The Stoic philosophers, who emerged in the Hellenistic period, found in the Titans a different kind of wisdom. They interpreted Cronus as time itself, the force that devours all things, but also preserves them in memory and tradition. The castration of Uranus became a symbol of the necessary separation between heaven and earth, spirit and matter, that allows for the existence of the physical world. The imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus represented the proper subordination of chaotic impulses to rational order. Cronus, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation in philosophical thought. Originally the child-devouring tyrant of myth, he became associated with the golden age of peace and plenty, a time when humanity lived in harmony with nature and with itself. This reinterpretation reflected the Stoic belief that the universe moved in great cycles, alternating between periods of cosmic order and cosmic dissolution, with each cycle beginning anew in a state of primordial perfection. The Roman poets, inheriting these Greek traditions, added their own layers of interpretation. Virgil, in his Aeneid, portrayed the Titans as symbols of the primitive, chaotic forces that must be overcome for civilization to flourish. The defeat of the Titans represented Rome's own triumph over barbarism and disorder, the establishment of law and order that would bring peace to the world. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, treated the Titans as part of a grand narrative of transformation and change. In his hands, the stories became meditations on the fluid nature of identity, the constant process of becoming that characterizes all existence. The Titans were not fixed beings, but symbols of the eternal principle of metamorphosis that governs both the natural world and human experience. The Neoplatonists of late antiquity found in the Titans yet another level of meaning. To them, the cosmic hierarchy from chaos through the Titans to the Olympians represented the emanation of being from the One, the supreme principle of existence. Each level of divine being was a step further from the source, a progressive materialization of pure spirit into the physical world. Plotinus, the greatest of the Neoplatonist philosophers, interpreted the Titanomachy as an allegory for the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The defeat of the chaotic Titans by the ordered Olympians represented the triumph of reason over passion, of spiritual insight over material attachment. The imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus symbolized the necessary suppression of lower impulses that allows the soul to ascend toward union with the divine. This philosophical interpretation of the Titans had profound influence on later Western thought. Christian theologians found in these pagan myths useful allegories for their own doctrines. The rebellion of the Titans against Uranus was seen as a prefiguration of Satan's rebellion against God, while their defeat and imprisonment foreshadowed the ultimate triumph of divine order over chaos and evil. Medieval scholars, working within this Christian framework, nevertheless preserved and transmitted the classical interpretations of the Titans. They saw in these ancient stories universal truths about the human condition, the struggle between reason and passion, order and chaos, civilization and barbarism. The Titans became part of the common intellectual currency of educated Europeans, symbols that could be invoked to illuminate everything from political theory to moral philosophy. The Renaissance brought a renewed interest in the original Greek sources, but also a new appreciation for their allegorical potential. Humanist scholars like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola found in the Titans symbols of the creative power of the human imagination, the divine spark that allows mortals to participate in the ongoing creation of the world. Artists of the Renaissance and Baroque periods drew on these philosophical interpretations to create works of stunning power and complexity. Rubens' paintings of the Titanomachy were not just mythological scenes, but meditations on the nature of power, conflict, and cosmic order. Bernini's sculptures captured the dynamic tension between opposing forces that the philosophers had identified as the driving principle of existence. The Romantic poets of the 18th and 19th centuries found in the Titans, particularly Prometheus, symbols of human creativity and rebellion against unjust authority. For them, the Firebringer represented the artist's role as challenger of conventional wisdom and bringer of new light to humanity. Byron, Shelley, and Goethe all wrote works that reimagined Prometheus as a heroic figure whose suffering was justified by his service to human progress. This romantic interpretation of the Titans as symbols of creative rebellion and individual genius had enormous influence on later literature and thought. The Titans became associated with the sublime, that aesthetic category that encompasses experiences too vast and powerful for ordinary comprehension. They represented the forces of nature and history that dwarf human understanding, but also inspire human creativity and aspiration. Modern psychology has found its own uses for Titanic symbolism. Carl Jung saw in the Titans representations of the collective unconscious, those primordial patterns of thought and feeling that shape human experience across cultures and centuries. The Titanomachy, in his interpretation, represented the eternal struggle between the conscious ego and the unconscious forces that both threaten and nourish it. Freud, characteristically, found in the myth of Cronus devouring his children a symbol of the Oedipal complex, the unconscious desire of fathers to eliminate their sons as rivals and of sons to overthrow their fathers. The cyclical nature of divine succession in Greek mythology reflected, in his view, the universal pattern of generational conflict that shapes family dynamics and social development. Contemporary scholars have continued to find new meanings in these ancient stories. Feminist interpreters have noted the marginalization of female titans like Gaia and Rhea in the traditional narratives, seeing in their stories reflections of patriarchal anxieties about female power and creativity. Post-colonial critics have identified in the defeat of the Titans echoes of the conquest and suppression of indigenous cultures by imperial powers. Environmental philosophers have found in Gaia, the Earth Mother, a symbol of the living planet that humanity must learn to respect and protect. The Titans, as representatives of natural forces, have become symbols of the ecological wisdom that modern civilization has forgotten in its rush toward technological dominance. What all these interpretations share is a recognition that the Titans represent something fundamental about the human condition and the nature of existence itself. Whether seen as psychological archetypes, philosophical concepts, or ecological symbols, they continue to speak to contemporary concerns and anxieties. They embody the eternal tension between order and chaos, tradition and innovation, authority and rebellion that characterizes all human societies. The transformation of the Titans from mythological beings into philosophical symbols represents one of the great achievements of Western intellectual history. It shows how ancient stories can be continually reinterpreted and renewed, finding fresh relevance in each new historical context. The Titans may have been defeated in their cosmic war with the Olympians, but their symbolic power has proved more enduring than any divine throne. In becoming metaphors, the Titans achieved a kind of immortality that their original mythological forms could never have provided. They became part of the permanent vocabulary of human thought, symbols that can be invoked whenever we need to speak about the deepest and most fundamental aspects of existence. They remind us that beneath the surface of our ordered, rational world lie forces of tremendous power and creativity, forces that can be destructive if not properly channeled, but that are also the source of all genuine innovation and progress. The visual and literary arts have served as the primary vessels through which the stories of the Titans have been preserved, transformed, and transmitted across the millennia. From the earliest Greek pottery to contemporary digital media, artists have found in these ancient myths an inexhaustible source of inspiration, using the dramatic conflicts and profound themes of Titanic mythology to explore the deepest questions of human existence. The earliest artistic representations of the Titans appear on Greek pottery from the Archaic period, roughly the 7th to 5th centuries before the Common Era. These black figure and red figure vases depicted scenes from the Titanomachy with a stark, powerful simplicity that emphasized the cosmic scale of the conflict. The artists of this period were not interested in psychological subtlety or realistic detail. They wanted to capture the essential drama of gods at war, the moment when the old order gave way to the new. One of the most famous of these early works is the François vase, created around 570 before the Common Era, which includes among its many mythological scenes a depiction of the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, attended by both Olympian gods and Titanic figures. The vase serves as a visual reminder that even after their defeat, the Titans remained part of the divine cosmos, their presence necessary for the complete understanding of the mythological world. The classical period saw the creation of some of the most magnificent artistic treatments of Titanic themes. The Parthenon in Athens, built in the 5th century before the Common Era, included sculptural representations of the Gigantomachy, the war between the Olympian gods and the giants, who were often conflated with or seen as successors to the Titans. These sculptures, carved by the greatest artists of the age under the direction of Phidias, presented the conflict not as a chaotic battle, but as a cosmic struggle between order and disorder, civilization and barbarism. The metopes of the Parthenon showed individual combats between gods and giants, each one a masterpiece of dynamic composition and emotional expression. The gods were portrayed as idealized figures of perfect beauty and proportion, while their opponents were shown as wild, primitive beings driven by brute force rather than divine reason. The message was clear. The victory of the Olympians represented the triumph of Greek civilization over the chaotic forces that threatened it. The Hellenistic period brought a new dramatic intensity to Titanic art. The Great Altar of Pergamon, constructed in the 2nd century before the Common Era, featured a massive frieze depicting the Gigantomachy with unprecedented emotional power and visual complexity. The sculptures writhed with movement and passion, showing gods and giants locked in desperate combat across a narrative that wrapped around the entire structure. What made the Pergamon frieze revolutionary was its psychological depth. These were not the serene, idealized figures of classical art, but beings caught in the grip of powerful emotions: rage, fear, triumph, despair. The giants were no longer simply monsters to be defeated, but tragic figures whose rebellion, however doomed, possessed a certain nobility. This more complex view of the Titans and their allies reflected the sophisticated philosophical and literary culture of the Hellenistic world. Roman artists inherited these Greek traditions, but added their own distinctive elements. Roman frescoes and mosaics often depicted Titanic themes in domestic settings, bringing these cosmic dramas into the everyday world of wealthy citizens. The House of the Vetii in Pompeii, for example, contains frescoes showing the punishment of various mythological figures, including scenes that echo the suffering of the defeated Titans. Roman poets like Ovid transformed the visual tradition through their literary innovations. In the Metamorphoses, Ovid retold the stories of the Titans with a focus on transformation and change that influenced artistic representations for centuries to come. His version of the myth of Prometheus, for instance, emphasized not just the Titan's punishment, but his role as creator and benefactor of humanity, themes that would resonate powerfully with later Christian artists. The medieval period saw a fascinating transformation of Titanic imagery. Christian artists and writers, while officially rejecting pagan mythology, found ways to incorporate Titanic themes into their work through allegory and symbolism. The rebellion of the Titans against the gods was reinterpreted as a prefiguration of Satan's rebellion against God, while figures like Prometheus were sometimes seen as Christ-like saviors who suffered for the benefit of humanity. Medieval manuscripts often included illustrations of classical myths alongside Christian stories, creating a visual dialogue between pagan and Christian traditions. The Titans appeared in these works not as objects of worship, but as moral exemplars, their stories serving to illustrate universal truths about pride, rebellion, and divine justice. The Renaissance brought a dramatic revival of interest in classical mythology, and with it, a new flowering of Titanic art. Artists like Michelangelo found in the Titans symbols of human creativity and divine inspiration. His unfinished sculptures, known as the prisoners or slaves, seem to struggle against the stone that confines them, evoking the Titans' imprisonment in Tartarus while also suggesting the artist's own struggle to liberate ideal forms from raw material. Titian's painting The Fall of the Titans presented the Titanomachy as a swirling chaos of bodies and emotions, with Jupiter's thunderbolts cutting through the darkness like divine judgment. The work captured both the terror and the grandeur of the cosmic conflict, showing how the defeat of the old gods was both necessary and tragic. The Baroque period intensified these themes even further. Peter Paul Rubens created a series of paintings depicting the Titanomachy with characteristic energy and sensuality. His The Fall of the Titans shows the defeated gods tumbling through space in a tangle of muscular bodies and flowing drapery, their faces expressing the full range of human emotion from defiance to despair. Rubens understood that the power of Titanic mythology lay not in its literal truth, but in its emotional resonance. His Titans were not ancient gods, but universal symbols of human ambition, creativity, and the tragic consequences of overreaching. They spoke to the Baroque fascination with dramatic contrasts, light and shadow, triumph and defeat, divine and human. The 18th century brought new interpretations influenced by Enlightenment philosophy. Artists began to see in the Titans, particularly Prometheus, symbols of human reason and scientific progress. The fire that Prometheus stole from the gods became a metaphor for knowledge itself, the divine spark that allowed humanity to understand and control the natural world. This interpretation reached its fullest expression in the Romantic period of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. For the Romantic poets and artists, Prometheus became the archetypal figure of the creative genius who suffers for his art and his dedication to human progress. Lord Byron's poem Prometheus presented the Titan as a noble rebel whose defiance of tyrannical authority made him a hero rather than a villain. Percy Bysshe Shelley's Prometheus Unbound went even further, reimagining the myth as a revolutionary allegory in which the Firebringer's liberation represents the triumph of human freedom over oppression. Shelley's Prometheus was not just a mythological figure, but a symbol of the human spirit's refusal to accept unjust authority. Visual artists of the Romantic period created some of the most powerful images of Titanic themes ever produced. Theodore Géricault's studies of Prometheus showed the Titan as a figure of sublime suffering, his torment elevated to the level of religious martyrdom. Eugène Delacroix's paintings of mythological subjects captured the violent energy and emotional intensity that the Romantics found in classical mythology. The 19th century also saw the emergence of new artistic media that found fresh ways to present Titanic themes. Opera composers like Franz Schubert and Gabriel Fauré created musical settings of Prometheus myths that used the power of music to convey the emotional depths of the stories. The combination of orchestral music, vocal performance, and dramatic staging created immersive experiences that brought audiences into direct contact with the mythological world. The 20th century brought radical new approaches to Titanic mythology. Modern artists, influenced by psychology, anthropology, and political theory, found in these ancient stories reflections of contemporary concerns about power, identity, and social change. Pablo Picasso's Titanomachy series used the figure of the Minotaur, a creature connected to the Titanic tradition through its monstrous nature and tragic fate, to explore themes of violence, sexuality, and artistic creation. Surrealist artists like Salvador Dalí and Max Ernst found in Titanic mythology a rich source of dreamlike imagery that could express the unconscious fears and desires that Freudian psychology had revealed. Their paintings transformed the classical stories into psychological landscapes where the boundaries between myth and reality, past and present, conscious and unconscious, dissolved into fluid, ever-changing forms. Contemporary artists continue to find new meanings in Titanic mythology. Anselm Kiefer's massive paintings and installations use mythological themes to explore the relationship between history, memory, and cultural identity. His works often incorporate actual materials, lead, ash, straw, that give physical weight to mythological concepts, making the ancient stories tangible and immediate. Digital artists and filmmakers have created new visual languages for presenting Titanic themes. Computer-generated imagery allows for the creation of truly cosmic-scale battles, while interactive media enables audiences to participate in mythological narratives in unprecedented ways. Video games like God of War have introduced Titanic mythology to new generations, though often in simplified or altered forms that prioritize action over the deeper philosophical themes of the original stories. Literature has undergone similar transformations. Modern novelists have retold the Titan stories from new perspectives, often focusing on previously marginalized characters or exploring the psychological dimensions of mythological conflicts. Madeline Miller's Circe presents the story of the minor goddess from her own perspective, revealing the complex inner life of a character who was traditionally seen only as an obstacle for male heroes. Science fiction and fantasy writers have found in Titanic mythology a template for stories about cosmic conflict and the relationship between technology and humanity. Works like Dan Simmons' Hyperion cantos use mythological structures to explore themes of artificial intelligence, human evolution, and the nature of consciousness itself. The influence of Titanic mythology on popular culture extends far beyond high art and literature. Comic books, television shows, and movies regularly draw on these ancient stories for their plots, characters, and themes. The Marvel Comics universe includes characters directly based on Titanic mythology, while films like Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans have brought these stories to global audiences, though often in heavily modified forms. What remains constant across all these artistic transformations is the recognition that Titanic mythology contains truths that transcend its original cultural context. Whether interpreted as psychological allegory, political metaphor, or spiritual symbol, these stories continue to speak to fundamental human experiences and concerns. They remind us that the struggle between order and chaos, tradition and innovation, authority and rebellion is not confined to ancient Greece, but is a permanent feature of the human condition. The artistic legacy of the Titans demonstrates the power of mythology to inspire creativity across cultures and centuries. These ancient stories have provided artists with a vocabulary of symbols and themes that can be endlessly recombined and reinterpreted to address the concerns of each new generation. In this sense, the Titans have achieved a kind of immortality that their original mythological forms could never have provided. They live on not as objects of religious belief, but as permanent residents of the human imagination. In our contemporary world, where ancient gods no longer command literal belief and mythological thinking has been largely supplanted by scientific understanding, the Titans might seem like relics of a bygone age, curiosities for scholars and enthusiasts of classical antiquity, yet nothing could be further from the truth. The Titans have not disappeared from our culture. They have transformed, adapted, and found new forms of expression that speak to modern concerns and anxieties with surprising relevance and power. The very word Titanic has entered our everyday vocabulary as a synonym for something vast, powerful, and potentially overwhelming. When we describe an effort as titanic, we invoke the memory of those primordial beings whose struggles shook the foundations of the cosmos. The RMS Titanic, that ill-fated ship whose name has become synonymous with hubris and catastrophic failure, carried within its very designation an echo of the ancient myths about the dangers of challenging the natural order. In the realm of business and technology, Titanic imagery appears with remarkable frequency. Companies name themselves after these ancient powers, seeking to associate their brands with concepts of strength, endurance, and transformative power. Titan Industries, Atlas Corporation, Prometheus Technologies. These names dot the corporate landscape like monuments to mythological memory, each one claiming a piece of the Titans' symbolic authority. The technology sector has been particularly drawn to Prometheus as a symbol of innovation and the democratization of knowledge. The Prometheus project, which aims to make scientific data freely available to researchers worldwide, explicitly invokes the Firebringer's role as the one who stole divine knowledge and gave it to humanity. Similarly, the Prometheus monitoring system used in computer networks takes its name from the Titan's role as a watchful protector of human interests. But perhaps nowhere is the Titanic legacy more visible than in popular entertainment. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has brought characters directly inspired by Titanic mythology to global audiences numbering in the billions. The character of Thanos, whose name echoes Thanatos, the personification of death born from the primordial night, embodies the Titanic theme of cosmic-scale conflict between order and chaos. His quest to reshape the universe according to his own vision, regardless of the cost in suffering, reflects the same kind of primordial ambition that drove the original Titans in their rebellion against the established order. The DC Comics universe has its own Titanic connections, most notably in the character of Wonder Woman, whose origins are rooted in Greek mythology and whose stories often involve conflicts with beings that echo the themes and patterns of Titanic mythology. The new gods of Jack Kirby's Fourth World Saga, with their cosmic conflicts and generational struggles for power, represent a modern reimagining of the Titanomachy for the space age. Video games have proven to be particularly fertile ground for Titanic themes. The God of War series, which began with the Greek pantheon before expanding to include Norse mythology, presents players with the opportunity to participate directly in mythological conflicts. The protagonist, Kratos, embodies many Titanic characteristics. He is a rebel against divine authority, a figure of immense power driven by personal grievance, and ultimately a force of change that reshapes the mythological world through violence and determination. The Titan series of games takes this connection even more literally, presenting players with massive mechanical beings whose conflicts echo the cosmic battles of their mythological namesakes. These games tap into the same fascination with overwhelming scale and power that made the original Titan myths so compelling to ancient audiences. Literature continues to find new ways to explore Titanic themes. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series has introduced millions of young readers to Greek mythology, including the stories of the Titans. While these books simplify and modernize the ancient myths for their target audience, they preserve the essential themes of generational conflict, the relationship between divine and mortal realms, and the ongoing relevance of ancient wisdom to contemporary problems. More sophisticated literary works have used Titanic mythology to explore complex philosophical and psychological themes. Jennifer Saint's Electra and Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls retell classical myths from the perspectives of female characters, revealing how Titanic themes of power, rebellion, and transformation apply to questions of gender, agency, and social justice. Science fiction has found in Titanic mythology a rich source of metaphors for humanity's relationship with technology and the cosmos. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, with its themes of cyclical history and the rise and fall of galactic civilizations, echoes the Titanic pattern of generational succession and cosmic transformation. More recent works like Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy use Titanic imagery to explore the terraforming of other worlds, with Prometheus serving as a symbol of humanity's role as bringer of life to dead planets. The environmental movement has embraced Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, as a symbol of the living planet that humanity must learn to respect and protect. James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, which proposes that the Earth functions as a single, self-regulating organism, draws directly on Titanic mythology to provide a framework for understanding ecological relationships. Environmental activists often invoke Gaia when calling for greater respect for natural systems and warning about the consequences of human hubris. This ecological interpretation of Titanic mythology has found expression in various forms of contemporary art and activism. Artists like Andy Goldsworthy create works that celebrate the creative power of natural forces, while environmental protesters sometimes adopt Titanic imagery to emphasize the cosmic scale of ecological destruction and the need for fundamental changes in human behavior. The field of psychology continues to find Titanic mythology relevant to understanding human behavior and mental processes. Carl Jung's concept of archetypes draws heavily on mythological figures, including the Titans, as universal patterns that shape human experience across cultures and historical periods. Modern therapists sometimes use mythological frameworks, including Titanic stories, to help clients understand their own psychological struggles and developmental challenges. The Prometheus complex, identified by some psychologists, describes individuals who feel compelled to challenge authority and bring forbidden knowledge to others, often at great personal cost. This psychological pattern, rooted in the myth of the Firebringer, helps explain the behavior of whistleblowers, revolutionary thinkers, and others who sacrifice their own well-being for what they perceive as the greater good. Educational institutions have found Titanic mythology useful for teaching everything from literature and history to philosophy and psychology. The stories provide a common cultural reference point that can be used to explore complex themes in an accessible way. Students who might struggle with abstract philosophical concepts can often grasp them more easily when they are presented through the dramatic narratives of Titanic mythology. The rise of social media and digital culture has created new venues for Titanic influence. Memes based on mythological themes circulate widely on platforms like Twitter and Instagram, often using Titanic imagery to comment on contemporary political and social issues. The figure of Prometheus, in particular, has become a popular symbol for those who see themselves as bringing enlightenment to the masses, whether through political activism, scientific research, or cultural criticism. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technology have also embraced Titanic symbolism. The Titan cryptocurrency explicitly invokes the power and endurance of the ancient beings, while various blockchain projects use names like Atlas and Prometheus to suggest their role in supporting or illuminating the digital economy. The space industry has found Titanic mythology particularly appealing as a source of names and symbols. Saturn's moon Titan, the largest moon in the solar system and the only one with a substantial atmosphere, carries the name of the ancient beings into the cosmos itself. Space exploration companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin often use mythological names for their projects, connecting their efforts to expand human presence in space with the Titanic theme of challenging cosmic boundaries. Academic conferences and scholarly publications regularly use Titanic themes to organize discussions about power, change, and cultural transformation. The concept of Titanic shifts has entered the vocabulary of historians, sociologists, and political scientists as a way to describe fundamental changes that reshape entire civilizations. Even in the realm of sports and competition, Titanic imagery maintains its appeal. The Tennessee Titans football team carries the name into professional athletics, while various Olympic and international competitions use Titanic symbolism to emphasize the heroic scale of athletic achievement. What all these contemporary manifestations share is a recognition that Titanic mythology continues to provide powerful metaphors for understanding human experience in the modern world. Whether we're grappling with technological disruption, environmental crisis, social inequality, or personal transformation, the ancient stories of cosmic rebellion and generational change offer frameworks for making sense of our contemporary challenges. The persistence of Titanic themes in modern culture also reflects deeper psychological and social needs that transcend historical periods. The human desire to understand our place in the cosmos, to make sense of suffering and conflict, to find meaning in struggle and transformation. These fundamental concerns are as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece. The Titans provide us with a vocabulary for discussing these eternal questions, a set of symbols that can be adapted to address the specific concerns of each new generation. Perhaps most significantly, the modern revival of interest in Titanic mythology reflects a growing awareness that the rationalist scientific worldview that has dominated Western culture for the past few centuries may not be sufficient to address all human needs. While science excels at explaining how things work, mythology provides frameworks for understanding why things matter. The Titans remind us that existence is not just a mechanical process, but a dramatic narrative filled with meaning, purpose, and moral significance. In our age of rapid technological change and global interconnection, the Titanic themes of rebellion against established authority and the democratization of power have particular resonance. The internet itself can be seen as a Promethean gift, a technology that has stolen the fire of information from institutional gatekeepers and given it directly to ordinary people. Social media platforms have become the modern equivalent of Prometheus's torch, spreading knowledge and enabling communication across traditional boundaries of geography, class, and culture. Yet, like the original Promethean gift, these technologies come with their own forms of suffering and unintended consequences. The same platforms that democratize information also spread misinformation. The same technologies that connect us globally also fragment us locally. The same tools that empower individuals also enable new forms of surveillance and control. In this sense, we are living through our own version of the Pandora myth, discovering that every technological gift contains within it both blessing and curse. the environmental crisis facing our planet has given new urgency to the figure of Gaia, the Earth Mother whose children's rebellion against cosmic order led to catastrophic conflict. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecological destruction can be understood as symptoms of humanity's titanic hubris, our attempt to reshape the natural world according to our own desires without regard for the consequences. The Gaia hypothesis suggests that the Earth itself may respond to this challenge as the original Gaia did to the imprisonment of her children, with consequences that could reshape civilization itself. In the realm of artificial intelligence and machine learning, Titanic mythology provides frameworks for understanding the relationship between creators and their creations. The development of increasingly sophisticated AI systems raises questions that echo the ancient myths about divine creation and rebellion. Will artificial intelligences remain obedient servants? Or will they eventually challenge their human creators as the Titans challenged the primordial gods? The myth of Prometheus creating humanity from clay takes on new relevance in an age when humans are creating artificial minds from silicon and code. The global political landscape of the 21st century has also been shaped by Titanic themes. The rise of populist movements around the world can be understood as a form of titanic rebellion against established political and economic elites. These movements often present themselves as champions of ordinary people against corrupt and distant authorities, echoing Prometheus's role as benefactor of humanity against the selfish gods. Yet, like the original Titanic rebellion, these contemporary political upheavals often lead to unintended consequences and new forms of tyranny. The cycle of revolution and reaction that characterized the mythological succession of divine rulers continues to play out in human politics, reminding us that the overthrow of one form of authority often leads to the establishment of another. The COVID-19 pandemic has provided a particularly vivid example of how Titanic themes continue to resonate in contemporary experience. The virus itself can be seen as a kind of Pandora's box, a force unleashed into the world that has brought suffering and transformation on a global scale. The scientific response to the pandemic, with its rapid development of vaccines and treatments, represents a Promethean effort to steal fire from nature and use it for human benefit. Yet the pandemic has also revealed the limitations of human power and the persistence of forces beyond our control. Like the ancient Titans facing the thunderbolts of Zeus, we have discovered that our technological prowess, however impressive, cannot completely shield us from the fundamental uncertainties and vulnerabilities of existence. The rise of social media influencers and content creators represents another modern manifestation of Titanic themes. These individuals often position themselves as rebels against traditional media gatekeepers, using digital platforms to bypass established authorities and speak directly to audiences. Like Prometheus bringing fire to humanity, they claim to be democratizing access to information, entertainment, and cultural influence. Yet this democratization comes with its own costs and complications. The same technologies that enable individual creativity and expression also create new forms of exploitation and manipulation. The attention economy that drives social media platforms can be as demanding and destructive as any mythological punishment, trapping creators in cycles of constant content production and audience engagement. The contemporary fascination with superhero narratives can also be understood as a modern expression of Titanic themes. Superheroes are essentially modern titans, beings of extraordinary power who exist in tension with established authority and social order. Their stories often involve conflicts between individual conscience and institutional demands, between the desire to help humanity and the need to respect social boundaries. The most compelling superhero narratives are those that grapple seriously with the moral complexities of power, exploring how even well-intentioned actions can have unintended consequences. These stories reflect the same wisdom that the ancient Greeks embedded in their Titanic myths, that power without wisdom is dangerous, that rebellion without understanding can lead to chaos, and that the greatest heroes are often those who suffer for their commitment to justice. As we look toward the future, Titanic mythology seems likely to remain relevant as long as humans continue to grapple with questions of power, change, and meaning. The specific forms that these ancient themes take will undoubtedly continue to evolve, adapting to new technologies, social structures, and cultural contexts. But the underlying patterns, the cycle of rebellion and succession, the tension between order and chaos, the price of knowledge and the burden of power, these seem to be permanent features of the human condition. In this sense, the Titans have achieved a form of immortality that their original mythological forms could never have provided. They live on not as objects of religious worship, but as permanent residents of the human imagination, symbols that can be invoked whenever we need to make sense of the deepest and most challenging aspects of existence. They remind us that we are part of a story much larger than our individual lives, a cosmic drama that began before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. The Titans teach us that this story is not a tragedy, despite its elements of conflict and suffering, but something more complex and ultimately hopeful. It is a story about growth, change, and the endless human capacity for transformation. It suggests that even the most overwhelming challenges can be overcome through courage, wisdom, and solidarity with others who share our struggles. Most importantly, the Titans remind us that we are not passive victims of forces beyond our control, but active participants in the ongoing creation of the world. Like Prometheus bringing fire to humanity, like Atlas bearing the weight of the heavens, like Gaia nurturing life from the primordial chaos, we each have a role to play in the great work of existence. The ancient stories live on because they help us understand what that role might be and inspire us to fulfill it with dignity, courage, and hope. As we reach the end of our journey through the vast landscape of Titanic mythology, it's worth pausing to consider what these ancient stories have taught us about the nature of existence, the patterns of history, and the enduring power of narrative to shape human understanding. The story of the Titans is, at its heart, a story about time itself, not just chronological time, but the deeper rhythms of change and transformation that govern all existence. From the primordial emergence of order from chaos through the successive generations of divine rulers to the ongoing influence of these myths in contemporary culture, we see the same patterns repeating at different scales and in different contexts. This cyclical nature of Titanic mythology reflects a profound insight about the nature of reality that the ancient Greeks understood intuitively, that existence is not a linear progression towards some final destination, but an eternal dance between opposing forces, a constant process of creation, destruction, and renewal. The Titans represent the creative chaos that must be periodically unleashed to prevent the universe from becoming static and lifeless. In Cronus, we see time as both creator and destroyer, the force that brings all things into being and eventually consumes them. His devouring of his children represents the way that each generation must be absorbed by the past before it can give birth to the future. Yet his eventual defeat by Zeus shows that time itself can be transcended through wisdom, courage, and the willingness to embrace change. In Prometheus, we find the archetype of the rebel who suffers for the sake of others, the one who steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity regardless of the personal cost. His story reminds us that progress always comes with a price, that knowledge and freedom must be won through struggle, and that the greatest gifts often come from those who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the common good. In Gaia, we encounter the eternal feminine principle, the nurturing mother who gives birth to all things but who also has the power to destroy what she has created when it becomes corrupt or stagnant. Her story speaks to the deep ecological wisdom that recognizes the Earth as a living being deserving of respect and care, not merely a resource to be exploited. In Atlas, we see the burden of responsibility that comes with power, the weight of holding up the world that falls to those who are strong enough to bear it. His eternal punishment reminds us that leadership is not a privilege but a form of service, and that those who would reshape the world must be prepared to carry its weight forever. These archetypal figures and the stories that surround them have provided humanity with a vocabulary for understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. They offer us ways to think about questions that rational analysis alone cannot answer. Why do we suffer? What is the meaning of sacrifice? How should power be used? What is our relationship to the natural world? How do we find hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges? The enduring appeal of Titanic mythology lies not in its literal truth, but in its psychological and spiritual accuracy. These stories map the landscape of the human soul with remarkable precision, identifying the forces and conflicts that shape our inner lives and our relationships with others. They provide us with models for understanding our own struggles and aspirations, showing us that our personal challenges are part of larger patterns that connect us to all of human experience. The transformation of the Titans from mythological beings into philosophical concepts, artistic symbols, and cultural metaphors demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of these ancient stories. Each generation has found new meanings in them, new applications for their wisdom, new ways to use their symbolic power to address contemporary concerns. This process of reinterpretation and renewal ensures that the Titans remain alive and relevant, not as museum pieces, but as active participants in ongoing cultural conversations. In our own time, as we face challenges that seem to require titanic solutions, climate change, technological disruption, social inequality, global conflict, these ancient stories offer both warning and inspiration. They remind us that transformation is possible, but that it always comes with costs, that rebellion against unjust authority is sometimes necessary, but that it must be guided by wisdom and compassion, that the power to reshape the world carries with it the responsibility to use that power wisely. The Titans teach us that we are not the first generation to face seemingly impossible challenges, nor will we be the last. They show us that human beings have always found ways to adapt, to grow, to transcend their limitations through creativity, courage, and cooperation. They remind us that even in the darkest times, there are always those willing to steal fire from the gods and share it with their fellow humans. Perhaps most importantly, the Titans remind us that we are part of a story much larger than our individual lives, a cosmic narrative that began before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. This perspective can be both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reminds us of our limitations and mortality. Empowering because it suggests that our actions have meaning within a larger context, that our struggles and sacrifices contribute to something greater than ourselves. The ancient Greeks understood that mythology was not just entertainment, but education, not just storytelling, but soul-making. The myths of the Titans were designed to shape character, to provide moral guidance, to help people understand their place in the cosmic order. They were tools for creating meaning in a universe that often seemed chaotic and indifferent. In our contemporary world, where traditional sources of meaning and authority have been weakened or discredited, these ancient stories offer alternative frameworks for understanding existence. They suggest that life is not meaningless, but mythic, not random, but patterned, not isolated, but connected to larger rhythms and purposes. The Titans have been defeated, imprisoned, transformed, and forgotten, yet they continue to influence our world in countless ways. They live on in our language, our art, our literature, our psychology, our politics, our technology, our dreams. They remind us that the past is not dead but alive, not gone but present, not irrelevant but essential to understanding who we are and who we might become. As we face an uncertain future filled with both promise and peril, the wisdom of the Titans offers us guidance. They teach us to embrace change while respecting tradition, to challenge authority while accepting responsibility, to seek knowledge while acknowledging mystery, to pursue power while practicing humility. They remind us that we are all, in our own ways, children of the Titans, inheritors of their creative power, their rebellious spirit, their capacity for both destruction and renewal. The fire that Prometheus stole from the gods burns within each of us, waiting to be kindled into flame. The question is not whether we will use this power, but how we will use it, and for what purposes. The story of the Titans is not finished because it is our story, and we are still writing it. Every act of creativity, every moment of rebellion against injustice, every sacrifice made for the sake of others, every effort to understand and improve the world. All of these are chapters in the ongoing Titanic saga. We are not just readers of these ancient myths, but participants in their continuation, not just students of their wisdom, but inheritors of their responsibility. In the end, the Titans teach us that existence is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be celebrated, not a tragedy to be mourned, but an epic to be embraced. They show us that even in defeat, even in suffering, even in the face of overwhelming odds, there is always the possibility of transformation, always the hope of renewal, always the chance to begin again. The cosmos may be vast and indifferent, but it is also alive with meaning and possibility. The Titans remind us that we are part of this cosmic story, that our lives matter, that our choices have consequences that ripple through time and space. They call us to be worthy of our inheritance, to use our power wisely, to carry forward the flame of consciousness and compassion that they first kindled in the darkness of primordial chaos. And so the story continues, as it always has and always will, with each new generation discovering the Titans anew, finding in their ancient wisdom fresh insights for contemporary challenges, adding their own chapters to the eternal tale of rebellion, transformation, and hope. The Titans sleep, but they do not die. They wait, patient as stone, eternal as time itself, ready to awaken whenever humanity needs reminding of its own titanic potential. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the day's struggles fade and the night's dreams begin to stir, we can still hear their voices whispering across the centuries, telling us stories of gods and monsters, heroes and villains, triumph and tragedy. They remind us that we too are part of this great story, that we too have roles to play in the cosmic drama, that we too can choose to be titans in our own right, not through conquest or domination, but through the quiet heroism of daily existence, the patient work of building a better world, the endless effort to kindle light in the darkness and hope in the human heart. The Titans have given us their greatest gift, the understanding that we are not alone, that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our struggles and dreams connect us to all who have come before and all who will come after. In accepting this gift, we become worthy inheritors of their legacy, carriers of their flame, authors of the next chapter in the eternal story of existence itself. And so we end where we began, with chaos and the first stirring of order, with the eternal dance of creation and destruction, with the endless cycle of rebellion and renewal that defines not just the cosmos, but the human heart. The Titans may be gone, but their spirit lives on in every act of courage, every moment of compassion, every effort to understand and improve the world. They are not just figures from the past, but possibilities for the future. Not just myths, but models. Not just stories, but invitations to greatness. The fire still burns, the story continues, and we, the children of Titans, carry both forward into whatever tomorrow may bring. And there, in the gentle darkness of your room, as the ancient stories fade into the quiet rhythm of your breathing, know that you too are part of this eternal tale. Rest now, knowing that the Titans watch over your dreams, that their wisdom flows in your veins, and that tomorrow you will wake with the power to kindle new fires, to challenge new authorities, to transform new worlds. Sleep well, child of Titans. Your story is just beginning.